All right, it's that time of the year. We're talking mock offseason. I want to give you guys my coaching picks, the players we bring in, the players we draft, and how the New York Jets could look in 2025. Jets! All right, gang, welcome in. I'm excited to get into this. This is my mock offseason 1.0. This is going to be the scenario if Rodgers decides to hang it up and retire. Now, I'm going to do a few other ones as if Rodgers does come back. We can kind of do a little bit of discussion and processing how things could possibly look in 2025. As of recording this video, the Jets have not selected a GM or head coach, so I'm going to do my best to kind of guess which direction they're going to go. I'll give you my GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator for two different routes that I think they could go. So I'll go through one list and then the next. We're going to go through the free agents, cuts, re-signs, draft picks, all that good stuff. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And if you want to argue with me, via the internet, I do live streams every Monday and Tuesday, so feel free to join me there. But let's hop right into it. The first tree of front office staff that I think I would look at, Thomas Dimitroff, GM, former GM of the Atlanta Falcons, spent his time with the Patriots initially, wound up becoming the GM of the Falcons back in like 2008 when they drafted Matt Ryan. He made a ballsy trade up to go get Julio Jones early on in his tenure there. And that was a time when they had Roddy White. It wasn't necessarily a given that they should go up and trade for a wide receiver, but he made a ballsy move. And Julio Jones was arguably like the best receiver in the league for, or considered like a top 3 receiver in the league for like 10 years after that. So that team was highly competitive, really strong offenses. Not to mention, they kind of took a little bit of a dip, and then he built them back up to get to a Super Bowl in 2000. Do I have my years right? 2016? Is that right? When they ultimately lost to the Patriots in that 23-3 game at halftime. Epic collapse, but I would argue that it's not his fault that they lost that game because he got the players in place for them to win that game, and there's nothing he can really do once they're already in position to win. So I really like Thomas Dimitroff. He was one of the first guys we brought in to interview for GM. He was actually the first guy we brought in during the season. So I think there's a little bit of like a, hey, we really want you, and people want to feel wanted, right? Like I think that's a really good thing for the Jets. Now, if you bring in Thomas Dimitroff, I think for head coach, you could look towards Brian Flores. And a lot of people are going to be like super polarized on Brian Flores, particularly because of the Ryan Fitzpatrick clip that came out about, him alienating coaches and players and whatnot down in Miami, and no coaches are going to speak up for him or whatever Fitzpatrick had to say. And I think you absolutely need to take that into consideration. Now, one interesting thing is that Brian Flores and Thomas Dimitroff overlapped in New England. So bringing Dimitroff in at the end of the season might have been doing some reconnaissance on Brian Flores as well. The Jets are also interviewing Ryan Grigson, who is the assistant GM, is that right? Assistant GM or VP of player personnel, whatever it is, of the Vikings. So he's also going to have some insight into Brian Flores as well. So I think the Jets are trying to do a little bit of research on him. I think as far as Flores is concerned, discipline. The Jets were one of the most undisciplined teams in the NFL, league high in penalties. Brian Flores, when he was the coach of the Dolphins, was like league lowest in terms of penalties. I say that is like the fourth aspect of the game. You got offense, defense, special teams, and then the yardage that's gained and lost, the first downs that are gained and lost via penalties in a game. And the Jets shot themselves in the foot. And when you're losing so many games by one possession or by one score late in games, the penalties are kind of the devil that's in the details. And you got to get that under control. When Brian Flores was fired from Miami, I thought this was like a what are they doing type of scenario. Like this is a guy that just went the final 9 games of his career in Miami. He went 8-1 and then got fired. And then he came out against the Dolphins saying like, hey, they tried to pay me to lose games. They wind up losing draft picks. He's like kind of blackballed from the league for a little bit, winds up learning under Tomlin for a little bit, then goes to Minnesota. So I really like where his defenses have been. I think that could bring a little bit of juice back to the Jets' defensive side of the ball. And I like former head coaches that had the opportunity to reflect on what went wrong the first time. So I think that is a big component of this. As far as offensive coordinator goes, we're bringing back Uncle Josh, baby. I love me some Josh McCown. I think the Jets really like Josh McCown. The people in that building really like Josh McCown. Now, he's never called plays, which is definitely a concern. It's going to be a risk. But he's played on 12 different teams throughout his NFL career, not to mention learned under Frank Reich and now Kevin O'Connell, who both have called plays in the past. So I think he's got a wealth of knowledge kind of being able to, to pull from, right? Like he knows what works, what doesn't work, things he likes, things he doesn't like. And heck, Sam Darnold's looking pretty damn good over in Minnesota. And maybe there's a little bit of the confidence that Josh McCown had in him that did help unlock some of that potential in Sam Darnold. As far as defensive coordinator goes, I would really like to look at Marcus Dixon. He is the D-line coach for the Minnesota Vikings right now. He's a former Jet that played under Rex Ryan. I think he has learned under, what was it? Was it, I have it written down here, Raheem Morris and Vance Joseph. So he's got a little bit of a tree to pull from as far as knowledge, calling plays on the defensive side of the ball. So I think that's a nice swing for the Jets to try and consider. I think the defensive line is an area that the Jets really want to try and build back up. Obviously, losing JFM this past year was painful, so I think having some focus on that side is not too bad. And all these guys coming from the Vikings opens the door potentially in the opportunity that J.J. McCarthy becomes available via trade. At the very least, you have guys in the building that know the scouting of J.J. McCarthy from when they drafted him in Minnesota and how his injury progressed over the course of the season. So if the Jets were to even consider making that type of move at some point in the future, they would at least have a knowledge base on whether it's good or not good to make that decision. So I think that is one coaching staff you could kind of go down. Now, if you go a different route, and one that I think is probably a little bit more likely to happen, is the Detroit Lions kind of Aaron Glenn sort of scenario. So in that respect, I think GM is going to wind up being Chris Spielman. Chris Spielman is the CEO of football operations for Detroit or something along those lines, but he's also the brother of Rick Spielman, who is heading the search for the Jets GM role. He is brother to Rick Spielman, and a lot of Lions fans consider Chris being the key component as to how the Lions kind of turned it around. So whether the Jets bring him in as GM or as some type of president of football operations or something along those lines, then you bring in, a different GM, maybe it's Thomas Dimitroff, whatever. I think this guy is a key component to that puzzle. I would like to bring him in. As far as GM experience, he really doesn't have any, and that's kind of why I say the executive role is probably a little bit better for him. But Aaron Glenn, bring back former player, former cornerback for the New York Jets, Aaron Glenn. This guy turned down the Patriots head coaching interview, and it just made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I was like, this guy is forever a New York Jet, and he's endeared. Not to mention he had an interview on some podcast where he's talking about relationships with players. And even though the Saleh experiment didn't really work out in the end, largely, I think, because, I don't know, we just didn't really have offensive development. And, I don't think Zach Wilson was very good. And there's a whole lot of, headaches and issues that come with it. But I do think players in this day and age really like coaches that they can relate with. Aaron Glenn, being a former cornerback in the NFL, might be a pretty good mentor for, a Sauce Gardner. A highly drafted cornerback for us might be something they kind of consider. Really, the only reason I don't love Aaron Glenn as a head coach is because I have it in my mind that I want the Jets to hire an offensive-minded coach or a former head coach that's been a head coach before, because those are the two things the Jets haven't really done in the last few years. And Aaron Glenn's biggest knock is that he's just on the defensive side of the ball and he's a first-time head coach. So if you can kind of get over that, I think Aaron Glenn's going to be a really nice hire for the New York Jets. As far as offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, there's ties that I think he could bring in for the New York Jets to really have some success, because you need to rely on some strong foundational pieces if you're going to be a first-time head coach. I want Glenn to be a CEO-style head coach. I don't want him calling the defense. I don't want him spread way too thin. So I think on the offensive side of the ball, a guy who's tied to the Jets in the past is also tied to Aaron Glenn, both in his time with the New Orleans Saints and with his time in Detroit. And that is passing game coordinator of the Denver Broncos, John Morton. I really liked John Morton as the Jets offensive coordinator back in 2017 when we had literally Josh McCown and Robbie Anderson as our offense, and he made them look really good. I don't know why he wound up getting fired after that season. It made no sense to me, so I would fully endorse him coming back to the New York Jets. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I would look at probably a Dennis Allen, someone who's been a head coach in the past, has ties with Aaron Glenn back with the Saints. So that just sort of seems to be a nice little meshing there. So there's a lot of experience on this regime. I think either way you go, whether you go the Brian Flores route or you go the Aaron Glenn route, let me know which pathway you want to go down. Now that the coaching staff is out of the way, I want to look at some of the cuts that I would make to the roster or retires, things of that nature. Aaron Rodgers, we said he's no longer coming back. We're going to say he retires at the end of the season. I think C.J. Mosley also retires at the end of the season. Davante Adams, probably going to be cut in the event Rodgers does retire. I don't think he's going to sign a longer-term deal with the New York Jets, and it's probably pretty decent for the Jets to kind of hit more of a reset on that. Anyway, Allen Lazard, gone. Max Mitchell, gone. Michael Clemens, gone. Greg Zuerlein, you're out of here as well. As far as re-signs for the New York Jets, I'd be looking at Jamien Sherwood. I thought he did a really, really nice job this year, filling in for C.J. Mosley. Bring him back. My concern is that if Salah goes somewhere else or Ulbrich goes somewhere else, being linebackers coaches, I could see him maybe drift off to the side and follow them, but I would love to retain him here in New York. Brandon Echols, we are going to lose DJ Reed. I don't think Reed comes back to the Jets. He's looking forward to free agency. I think he's just done. Echols filled in really nicely in that Eagles game 2 years ago when the Jets had a pass rush. Him and Bryce Hall were the two cornerbacks. We didn't have Sauce, we didn't have Reed, and they were able to shut down the Eagles' passing attack. So I would like to bring back Brandon Echols on a pretty cheap deal. Right tackle Morgan Moses, I want to bring you back. 1 year contract. I think at the very least, you feel good about having your 5 returning offensive linemen for whoever your quarterback's going to be right in front of you. And then at the very least, you kind of build from there. Morgan Moses is an Iron Man. Would love to bring him back. Jalen Mills, I thought, did all right as a safety. I thought he's probably our best safety on the year. He did get hurt towards the end of the season. I would like to bring him back on a 1 year deal. And then the final guy I want to bring back is Kenny Yeboah, tight end. A little special teams action. I like Kenny Yeboah. I don't think he's going to cost you a whole heck of a lot either. I think Conklin's probably gone in the event that Rodgers is gone as well. So Yeboah is right as rain for me. And I think from a cost perspective, your most expensive guy is going to wind up being Jamien Sherwood. Morgan Moses is probably that next tier down, and then Echols, Mills, and Yeboah are all going to be relatively cheap. As far as salary cap space goes, you haven't really spent a whole crazy ton, right? As far as extensions go, before we get into free agency, there's 2 guys that I would look at. Primarily AVT. AVT's got a $15 million cap hit this year because he's going into his 5th year option. I would love to extend him. Now, maybe the new regime comes in and says, hey, we want to wait and see what happens with AVT before we extend him long term. So this might have to get done in season, but I do like the idea of keeping AVT around, whether that's because he has the flexibility of guard tackle or because he's just like a pretty rock solid player in general. So I would like to keep him around. And it drops his cap hit for the 2025 season if you extend him. The other thing I would do is I would exercise Jermaine Johnson's 5th year option. I do think that's something they're going to wait on until after the draft. I don't think it's something they're going to do immediately. I also think there's the potential of them not exercising it because of that terrible Achilles injury that he suffered. There might be a situation where they're like, hey, we want you to prove it to us, and then we'd rather, be in a situation where we have to extend you at the end of the year because you've overperformed as opposed to paying you in the hopes that you recover in the future. I just really like JJ. I think he's young enough to recover. I think he's got the right mindset to recover. So I would exercise the 5th year option on Jermaine Johnson. It would be about a $14.7 million 5th year option because he didn't hit the Pro Bowl either of his 2 years, and he's not going to hit the playing time threshold that you need to get the elevated 5th year option. That takes us to free agency. So outward free agency, people that are no longer on their existing teams that we get to finally look after. And the first player I would take a look at is on the offensive line. And I'm looking at Jedrick Wills, the left tackle from the Cleveland Browns. Now, he fell out of favor because partway through, last year he got hurt, 2023. And then 2024, he kind of got dinged up a little bit and said something along the lines of like, hey, I'm not feeling 100%. I want to kind of watch out for me until I'm not going to play until I'm feeling 100%. And that sort of fell out of favor, so he got benched for a little bit. So I think he's going to be able to take a relatively cheap prove-it deal to prove that he can stay healthy, to prove that he is going to be worth a longer-term extension. And with the New York Jets, he's going to have an opportunity to start because he's going to compete with Morgan Moses on the right-hand side. Now, you might be saying, hey, why are you taking a left tackle and moving him to the right? Well, he played left tackle his entire career with the Browns, but he started for 3 years at Alabama at right tackle. So this is not foreign for him whatsoever. Not to mention it gives you a little bit of stability on the left-hand side in the event Olu, gets a setback with his Liz Frank injury or, just goes down with an injury in general. You're not leaving your quarterback up Schitt's Creek. You still have Morgan Moses. You still have Jedrick Wills. You still have Olu Fashanu. I think that would be a really nice way to round out the offensive line. Not to mention he's still young enough. So if he does perform well, you can sign him to an extension and you don't have to waste a high draft pick. This is a guy that was a former first-round pick. He's clearly got the talent to perform. Let's just give him the tools to actually make it happen. So I like Jedrick Wills here in that situation. This next player, kind of goes one of two ways depending on which coaching staff you go. If you're going with the Flores route and that sort of tree, I think you look towards Cam Bynum. He's a safety from the Vikings, really outperforming. They thought they were going to re-sign him during the preseason this past year, but the Vikings have a lot of people to pay, Sam Darnold being one of those players. So I think there's going to inevitably be some guys that shake free. Flores is going to want to bring someone over from his defensive unit. Jets haven't really invested much money into their safety unit in the past, so this could be a mutual beneficial agreement here. He gets a nice little payday. Expect something along the lines of like a Xavier McKinney contract, if I had to guess, which is definitely more than I love, but new head coach gets his piece. On the Aaron Glenn side of things, if you were to go that route, I think Levi Unwuzereich, did I pronounce that right? I don't know. Over the cap values him at about $7 million. This is an interior defensive lineman that's going to be stout against the run. The Jets have had so many issues trying to stop the run this year. I think if you go that route, it would be a very nice way to plug him in next to Quinnen Williams. You got your defensive line set, and I don't think it's going to break the bank in terms of your salary cap space. And then the next player, which is, not either Flores or Aaron Glenn, I want to look at a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers not coming back. You got Jordan Travis. You got Tyrod Taylor, both under contract, going to be competing. I would like to bring in someone that has familiarity with some of the players on this team. I would like to go after Justin Fields. I think this is the type of mindset that he feels like he's been, passed over or, pushed aside by the Bears, then by the Steelers. He had an opportunity and was winning and then got pulled for Russell Wilson. So I think there's going to be a little bit of like angst to prove that he's better than other people. And not to mention, like, he's young. He could still be the truth. He could be the guy that leads you into the future if things click for him the right way. Why can't he be like a Sam Darnold or a Baker Mayfield or insert whatever Geno Smith type player you want to have that has success later on with other teams? I really like that. He's got a connection with Garrett Wilson and Jeremy Ruckert from his time at Ohio State. I think from a running game perspective, because I know you're not going to expect a crazy ton of passing from him right now, but from a run game perspective, you're going to be feeling pretty good with Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis with Justin Fields in the backfield. This could be a very punishing team to go against. And I really like the mentality of Justin Fields. I think from a leadership standpoint, he's not a bad way to go. 1 year cheap contract's not going to break the bank. If you have a bad season, you're just going with quarterback in 2026 anyway. And at that point, you've built up the rest of the team through the draft and all these other opportunities. Plus, it means you don't throw away the Jordan Travis pick either. You get an opportunity, basically 2 cracks at the quarterback position before investing heavily in the 2026 class, which seems to be like it's going to be a higher quality quarterback class coming out. So Justin Fields, I'm good with that. Now, that takes us to the NFL draft. And man, the Jets are sitting there with the 7th pick. We think the quarterbacks are going to go in front of us. There's a lot of good guys at the top end of this draft that they could be considering. But with Davante Adams leaving, Allen Lazard leaving, that leaves the Jets with Garrett Wilson and Malachi Corley. And like Xavier Gipson. So I don't really like that wide receiver room. I would like to add a big body to this room, someone that complements Garrett and Malachi, and that is none other than Tet McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. This guy's like 6'5". He catches like everything thrown his way. Like, you remember all the highlights of OBJ doing practices with the one-handed crazy catches and stuff? This is like this guy in game. He's that good. I very much like him. I think it pairs nicely with the 2 wide receivers we have already. And then at the very least, you're setting up Fields and Travis and Tyrod with a complement of weapons, not to mention whatever quarterback you take in 2026. When we get into the 2nd round, man, a lot of Jet fans are going to be kind of heated with this because you could have had Brock Bowers last year, but I'm thinking tight end in the 2nd round. And I want someone that is a weapon. Blocker's fine, but I want someone that can create mismatches on the outside. I want someone that can be a ball catcher out of, off the offensive line and whatnot. And that is none other than Harold Fannin Jr., tight end out of Bowling Green. Jets need pass catchers in the worst way. And this dude had I think it was 1,300 yards and a ton of touchdowns. This guy is absolutely a freak. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl, so we get an extra opportunity to look at him. I love me some Senior Bowl guys because you're seeing them against some really stout competition and you're getting a little bit of hands-on action because all the coaches go down there. You get interview processes, so you have a little bit more information on him than maybe some of these other guys that you'd consider. In the 3rd round, the Jets really, really need some interior defensive tackle help. Like, yes, we brought in the guy from Detroit, but I think you're still going to be looking for some depth there. The Jets are going to be without Solomon Thomas. We're going to be without 𝐂𝐿𝐴. You're going to be without Javon Kinlaw. So the Jets do need defensive linemen. And the Jets got a lot of draft picks. We got 2 5ths, 2 6. Jets have a lot of opportunity to try and shake and bake and move things up. I'm going to say the Jets trade away their 3rd round pick, 2 5ths and a 6th, and we're going to try and move up maybe to like the mid-3rd, top end of the 3rd, whatever you can get up to. And I want to take Alfred Collins, the interior defensive lineman out of Texas. This guy is a stout run blocker, and I think this would be a home run get for the New York Jets. He's also going to be at the Senior Bowl, so you get another opportunity to interview this guy and see him against additional competition, let alone we just saw him in the college football playoffs. So, like, I really like it. I think that's where you need to go. 27 stops this past year. Pretty solid all the way around. Now, that leaves the Jets with a 4th round pick and a 6th round pick remaining. In the 4th round, I would like to look at right tackle Ozzy Trapilo from Boston College. This guy's an absolute freak in terms of like height and size. He's like 6'8", or at least that's what they list him at. I don't know if that's what he's going to come in at the combine. Massive human. Really, really big dude. Boston College just produces offensive linemen, so I like pulling from that school to begin with. No penalties in 2024, only gave up 2 sacks over the course of the last 2 seasons at Boston College. He has 1,400 snaps at right tackle, 646 snaps at left tackle, and even has played a little bit of guard. So this guy's like a chess piece on the defensive or on the offensive line. So in the event something goes wrong, you have that positional flexibility. And either way, if let's say that Morgan Moses retires or Jedrick Wills retires, you have a stockpile of cheap talent that you could pull from with high upside. So I really like this pick in the 4th round. That takes me to my 6th round pick. Now, you may have noticed, we don't have a kicker. And the Jets desperately need one. We lost so many games because Zerline couldn't hit a kick, or like people missing extra points. And I don't even know how many kickers we had this year. What, we have 5 different kickers this season? It was ridiculous. Jets got to end that. We're going to take the best kicker in the draft, Ryan Fitzgerald out of FSU. 93% hit rate on field goals in 2024. He was 5 for 5 from field goals over 50 yards, even hit a 59-yard long. That sounds good to me. And I think kicker in the NFL honestly gets easier because the hash marks wind up moving in. So I think this guy's only going to get better as time progresses. Jets have an opportunity to lock in their guy for the next 4 years on not that kickers cost a lot, but on a cheap contract. And I'm feeling pretty good about this offseason. Now, as far as what did I leave out and things that I think could be areas of concern in the future, I definitely think quarterback's a major area of concern. I think the Jets punt on 2025 for the quarterback. You got to hit on it in 2026, but I think you've bolstered the roster enough in 2025 that you can feel good about trading up to go get your guy. Kind of like the Bills did in 2018 when they moved all the way up to get Josh Allen. They made multiple trades to get up into the top 10. You can look at the Texans or the Chiefs when they drafted Mahomes and Watson. They both traded up after being like playoff teams the year prior. I think that's a totally fine way to go, and you have less worry because you've rounded out most of the roster. I think edge is a major area of concern because you don't know how JJ is going to respond to that Achilles injury. I think that is a big time explosive type position, and pushing off of that Achilles is a very, very big deal. We might see a down year from JJ, and then you're starting to panic a little bit because I don't want a situation where Reddick can't get any sacks and you're only relying on Will McDonald. I think that's a recipe for not having success. So defense might not be feeling that great at this point next year if things go wrong. But under new defensive line coach or new defensive coordinator / D-line coach Marcus Dixon, I think you have a little bit of investment into the D-line. The secondary safety and cornerback, I think, could potentially be an issue here. The Jets address one safety in one of my examples, but I think there's definitely concern on the back end. But if you get pressure up front, a little less concern. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really mind the Jets having a not so great defense next year because we're going to need a quarterback. And I think by not having a defense, you're just going to inevitably give up a decent amount of points, which might wind up leading to some more losses than you might feel comfortable with. And based on the Jets' schedule next year, it's going to be a tough road. So cornerback, safety, losing DJ Reed, not really having too many answers at safety, I think is definitely an area of concern for 2026. And then linebacker depth. What winds up happening? Do you retain Jamie and Sherwood like I did in this mock offseason. Quincy Williams is going into the final year of his contract. Does he get a contract extension this offseason, or do they allow him to walk in the offseason next year? Does he get a contract extension mid-season? I would like to keep him around. I think Quincy's a heat-seeking missile. I would love to pair him with Quinnen for like the rest of their careers. It's just a lot of fun. I really like Quincy. So in summary, I address some key areas on the offense. I build an environment for young up-and-coming quarterbacks, both from the tight end room, the wide receiver room. We've got the running back room. I feel like we're feeling pretty decent. Boys and girls, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this mock offseason? Does it make sense? Do you like the players I selected? Do you like the moves that I made? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'll have my Aaron Rodgers returns mock offseason coming out in the next little bit here. Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, go Jets. J-E-T-S-J!